The phone rang at 12:04 in the morning, and the voice on the other end was already crying. I want you to hear it the way I heard it, because everything that happened over the next 3 weeks turned on the fact that I did not hang up. A younger man's voice, shaking, wet with panic. "Grandpa? Grandpa? It's me. I'm in trouble. Please don't be mad." And I sat up in the dark of my bedroom, 71 years old, a widower, 11 months into learning how to sleep alone, and I felt my heart do the thing every grandparent's heart does at midnight. It lurched toward the voice. It wanted to save him. But I'll tell you the one thing I knew in that first 4 seconds, that the young man on the phone did not know I knew. And once I tell you, you'll understand why I smiled in the dark instead of panicking, and why, 3 weeks later, 11 people in 3 states were arrested, and why I've never in my life slept better than I did the night it was over. I don't have a grandson, not one. I have a daughter, and my daughter has no children, and she never will, and that is a quiet grief in our family we do not talk about. So when a sobbing young voice called me at midnight and said, "Grandpa, it's me," I knew, before he finished the sentence, that I was not talking to family. I was talking to a hunter who had picked what he thought was the softest animal in the field. And I have to be honest about the first thing I felt, before the training kicked in, because it's the thing these criminals are really counting on, and I don't want to pretend I'm above it. For one raw second, before my mind caught up, my heart heard Grandpa, and it leapt, not toward Danny, because there is no Danny, but toward the grandchild I never got to have. That's the cruelty of this specific crime. It doesn't just target your love. It targets the shape of the love you were denied. For half a heartbeat, a stranger on a phone gave me the thing my life never did. A young voice calling me Grandpa in the dark. And part of me, the loneliest part, did not want to let go of it. That's how they get you. Not through your weakness, through the tenderest, most human place you have. He had no idea he'd called a man who used to hunt hunters for a living. My name is Frank Delano. And this is the story of the worst mistake a criminal ever made, which was assuming that an old man alone in the dark is a weak one. Stay with me to the end, friend, because nothing here is what it first appears, and the part you think is the ending is actually the trap closing. Let me go back to the beginning, to who I was before I was a lonely old man with a phone ringing at midnight, because that's the piece these people never bother to check. And it's the piece that ended them. For 33 years I worked fraud, financial crimes, wire fraud, organized scam operations, the boring, patient, paper-heavy side of law enforcement that never makes the movies. I wasn't a man who kicked down doors. I was a man who sat in a gray room for 11 hours, listening to a recorded call, again and again, until I heard the one word that told me where the money went. I built cases against people who stole from the elderly for a living. Boiler rooms, fake charities, grandparent scams. Yes, the exact one now being run on me. I knew this crime the way a retired surgeon knows the human heart. I had cut it open 100 times. Let me tell you about one of them, because it explains what I heard in that midnight voice that a normal man wouldn't have. Years ago I worked a case. A woman named Mrs. Abernathy, 84, who'd been bled dry over 14 months by a crew running this same grandparent script. By the time her son found out they'd taken everything, the house was next. I sat with her in her kitchen while she tried to explain how it had happened, and she kept saying the same sentence, over and over. With a shame that I have never been able to forget, she said, "I knew. Somewhere I knew. But he called me Grandma, and I couldn't hang up." That sentence taught me more about this crime than any training ever did. These people don't defeat your intelligence. They defeat your love. They reach into the softest, best part of you, the part that would drop everything to save a grandchild, and they turn it into the knife. I put that crew away. It took 2 years. And I promised myself, in Mrs. Abernathy's kitchen, that if I ever got the chance to do it from the inside, from the victim's chair, I'd take it. I did not know, sitting in that kitchen a decade ago, that the chance would come to me at 71, In the dark, 11 months after I buried my wife. I retired at 66. My wife Ruth got sick the year after, and for a while my whole world narrowed to her hospital bed. And when she passed, the house got very large and very quiet, and I did what a lot of us do. I got small. I stopped going out much. I let the days blur. And somewhere in the neighborhood, or in some database bought and sold in the dark, my name landed on a list. Widower, 71. Lives alone. Owns his home. The scavengers can smell a fresh grave, and they came to mine. I need you to understand how far down I'd gone, because it's the reason the trap I set worked. I didn't have to act very hard to sound like a broken old man, and that frightened me more than anything. After Ruth, I'd stopped cooking real meals. I ate standing up over the sink. I let the mail pile up. I'd catch myself at 3 in the afternoon still in my robe, sitting in her chair, not doing anything at all, just being where she used to be. My daughter would call and I'd make my voice bright for her, and hang up and go back to the silence. The man who'd run fraud task forces, who'd sat across from career criminals and never blinked, had become someone who could lose an entire day to a chair. That's what grief does. It doesn't just take the person. It convinces you that the version of yourself that mattered went with them. I believed that. For 11 months I believed the lights were off in my own house. I tell you this so you'll understand. When the scammers looked at my name on their list, they weren't entirely wrong. There really was a diminished old man at this address. They just didn't know he was a costume the real man had accidentally put on and forgotten how to take off. It took a crime to remind me I was still in here. So there I was at 12:04 a.m., holding the phone, listening to a stranger cry "Grandpa," and here is the exact moment the whole thing was decided. I had 2 choices. I could tell him he had the wrong number, hang up, block it, and go back to sleep, safe. Or I could do the thing 33 years had trained into my bones, the thing I hadn't felt stir in 5 years. I could let him think it was working, because a scammer who thinks he's failed simply hangs up and dials the next lonely name on the list. But a scammer who thinks he's succeeded keeps talking. He brings his friends, he leaves tracks. And the single most valuable thing you can ever have over a predator is for him to believe he is the predator right up until the cuffs close. I want to be honest about that choice, because it wasn't only strategy. There was something else in it, something I only understood later. When I decided not to hang up, part of me was choosing not to go back to the silence. Hanging up meant safety, yes, but safety meant returning to the chair, to the piled mail, to the long gray afternoons of a man waiting to join his wife. And some animal part of me, some part that wasn't ready to be done, looked at that ringing phone and saw not a threat, but a door, a way back into the world. I've had 5 years to be honest with myself about it, and here's the truth. I didn't just stay on the line to catch them. I stayed on the line because for the first time in 11 months, someone needed the man I used to be, even if that someone was a criminal who dialed me by accident. We are strange creatures. We will walk into danger for the simple gift of mattering again. So I made my voice old. Not hard, I am old, but I let it wander, let it shake, let it fill up with the exact fear he was fishing for. And I said the words that opened the door and let the fox all the way into the henhouse. I said, "Danny? Oh God, Danny, what's happened? Are you hurt?" I gave him a name. I gave the hunter a grandson named Danny, a grandson who does not exist, and I heard him seize it like a gift, and in that half-second I stopped being a victim and became something the 11 people on the other end of this operation would not understand until it was far too late for any of them. I became the investigation. Now, I have to tell you how these things actually work, because the mechanics matter. And because someone listening to this has a mother or a father who is going to get this exact call, and I need you to understand the shape of it so you can see it coming. The crying grandson is never the main act. He's the opener. His whole job is to get you emotional and get you to supply a name, which I'd handed him on purpose, and then to pass you up the ladder. Sure enough, Danny sobbed that he'd been in a car accident, that there was a woman hurt, that he'd been arrested, and that he wasn't allowed to tell his parents because he was so ashamed. Please, Grandpa, please don't tell Mom. That last part is the hook they care about most. Isolation. They must, above all, keep the victim from talking to another human being who might say the words, "This is a scam." Every line out of his mouth was engineered to wall me off inside my own fear. And here's what I was doing while he cried, that he had no idea I was doing. I was profiling him. Every word he chose, I was filing. When he said arrested, he pronounced it with the faintest hesitation, like a man reading a word rather than living it. A script, not a memory. When I cried back at him, he waited a half-beat too long before responding, the tell of someone glancing at notes or muting to talk to a handler beside him. When I said, "Danny, your voice sounds different," a line I dropped in on purpose, a little test, he had an answer ready so fast. "I'm crying, Grandpa. I've been crying, and my nose is broken from the airbag," that I knew he'd been asked that exact question 100 times by 100 grandparents and had the counter loaded. Amateurs fumble that question. He didn't fumble anything. I was 3 minutes into the call, and I already knew I wasn't talking to one desperate kid. I was talking to a trained employee of something larger, reciting a document that had been focus grouped against real grandparents until it was nearly perfect. Nearly. There's always a nearly. Their whole business runs on you being too frightened to notice the nearly. So I let him build the wall, brick by brick, because I wanted to see the whole thing, and because every brick he laid was a brick I'd later hand to Reyes. Then came the handoff. "I'm going to put my lawyer on, okay, Grandpa? He'll explain everything. Please just listen to him." And a new voice took over, and this one I want to describe carefully, because this was the professional, and this was the man I decided, right there in the dark, that I was going to take apart. Older, calm, authoritative, a lawyer's cadence, unhurried, using my supplied name, "Mr. Delano, I'm handling Danny's case," and laying out the story with the practiced smoothness of a man who has told it 1,000 times. And I want to pause on that smoothness, because it told me something. An amateur rushes. An amateur's story has seams, contradictions, the sound of someone making it up as they go. This man had no seams. His pacing was rehearsed to the syllable. His fake sympathy landed exactly where a real lawyer's would. This was not some kid in a basement. This was a trained operator working from a polished script, inside an organization with structure and quality control, and that single observation, "This is professional, this is a machine, not a man," was the moment my thinking changed. You don't set a trap for a machine the way you set one for a man. You have to give the machine what it's built to want, and let its own appetite pull it in. There'd been an accident. Danny was being held. There was a gag order. That's why the secrecy. And bail, plus a medical guarantee for the injured party, came to $9,400, needed tonight, in cash, handed to a court courier who would come to my home in the morning. 9,400. Notice the number, not 10,000. Because $10,000 in cash triggers federal reporting requirements at a bank, and these people know that better than most bankers do. Everything just under the line. Every detail, engineered by someone who has done this hundreds of times and learned exactly where the tripwires are. I'd taught younger agents to spot that specific tell, the just under 10,000 figure, as a fingerprint of an organized crew rather than a lone amateur. He'd just left a fingerprint, and he didn't even know I could see fingerprints. A courier, coming to my home. Do you understand what that means? It means one of them was going to physically show up at my door. Most of these operations are just voices from overseas. Untouchable. Ghosts on a wire. But the cash pickup model, that's the greedy version. The one where they send a real person, a money mule, to collect. And a real person has a face, a car, a license plate, a phone. A real person is a thread, and if you are very patient and you have spent 33 years learning how to pull a thread without breaking it, a real person is how you unravel the entire garment. The moment he said, "A courier will come to your home," I knew I wasn't going to catch a scammer. I was going to catch the whole machine, but I had to be careful now. More careful than I'd been about anything in years. Because here is the truth I need you to sit with. Knowing it's a scam is not the same as being safe from it. I had knowledge. What I did not have, at 71, alone, was youth, or backup, or a badge. If I tipped my hand even slightly, if my fear rang false for one sentence, the lawyer would smell it. These men are not stupid. They are, in their evil way, excellent at reading people, because their whole income depends on it. One wrong note and he'd hang up and vanish, and go ruin some other widower who didn't know the game. I couldn't allow that. I'd decided these people were mine, so I performed. And I want to tell you, it was the hardest acting of my life, harder than any undercover work I'd done young, because I wasn't pretending to be a criminal. I was pretending to be the frightened, diminished old man the world had already decided I was. I had to become the thing I was most afraid of actually becoming. I let my voice crack. I asked him to repeat the number because I was so shaken. I fumbled. I said, "Oh dear," and I don't understand these things. And I heard it happen. I heard him relax, heard the little warmth of contempt come into his voice, the tone a man uses for prey he's certain of. He started calling me sir, the way you'd pat a dog. There's a thing that happens when you perform weakness for a predator, and I need to name it because it's the strangest weapon I know, and almost nobody is willing to use it. Everyone wants to be seen as strong. It's the deepest human wiring there is. When someone underestimates us, every instinct screams to correct them, to show them, to make them respect us. And that instinct, that pride, is exactly the thing these criminals harvest. The man who has to prove he's sharp will argue, will push back, will reveal how much he knows. And the moment a scammer hears a victim who knows too much, he vanishes. But the man who is willing to be seen as a fool, who can swallow his pride and wear his own diminishment like a costume, that man is invisible. He can stand right next to the predator, close enough to touch, and the predator will never see him, because the predator has already filed him under harmless and stopped looking. I spent 33 years learning that the most powerful position in any room is the one nobody's watching. And the easiest way to make sure nobody's watching you is to let them believe there's nothing to watch. So I gave him nothing to watch. I gave him a scared old widower who didn't understand his own phone. And behind that costume, cold and awake and taking notes, was every hour of every case I'd ever worked. Every ounce of that contempt was a brick I was stacking for his own wall. But he couldn't see me building it. That's the whole art. Let them feel safe. Safety makes people careless, and careless people leave evidence. I told him I'd need until morning to get the cash from my safe. He didn't like the delay. They never do. Urgency is their whole weapon. But a compliant, terrified victim who just needs a few hours is too good to abandon. So he agreed. The courier would come at 10 a.m., and he made me promise, again and again, in that oily, calm voice, not to tell a soul. Not my daughter, not the bank, not the police. This is a sealed legal matter, Mr. Delano. Involving anyone else will hurt Danny. I won't tell anyone, I said, my voice trembling. I promise. I just want to help my grandson. And that was the biggest lie I have ever told, and I told it to a man who lies for a living, and he believed me completely, because the con man's one great weakness is that he cannot imagine being conned. He is so sure the room only contains one predator that he never checks the mirror. I hung up, and I sat in the dark, and for the first time since Ruth died, I felt the old thing come all the way back to life in my chest, the thing I thought I'd buried with my career and then with my wife. Purpose. Cold, clear, patient purpose. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They hadn't really been shaking at all. Now here is where I made the one decision that I want to hold up and examine, because it's the decision I'm proudest of, and it's the one that separates a good ending from a tragedy. I did not try to be a hero alone. I want to say that again, for every person my age listening, because our pride is the thing these people count on almost as much as our fear. The old man who decides to handle it himself, to teach them a lesson single-handed, to open the door to that courier and confront him man to man. That old man gets hurt, sometimes killed. I had spent a career cleaning up after exactly that kind of misplaced courage. I knew better. Knowing when you are outnumbered is not weakness. It is the beginning of actually winning. So at 1 in the morning I did something the lawyer had spent an hour forbidding me to do. I made a phone call, but not to 911, and I'll explain why that mattered, because this is the practical heart of the whole thing. If I'd called the emergency line, I'd have gotten a patrol officer, kind and overworked, who would have taken a report about an attempted phone scam, a crime with no suspect in hand, a ghost on a wire, and it would have gone into a very tall stack. What I had was better than a report. I had a scheduled in-person meeting with a live member of the organization at a known time, at a known place, my own front porch. That is not a complaint. That is an operation. And operations need to go to the people who run operations. I still had one number. 33 years builds you a strange kind of family. And though most of mine had retired or passed, there was a younger agent I'd trained 2 decades back. A woman named Reyes who used to sit in my gray rooms, learning to hear the one word in the 11-hour tape. She ran a financial crimes task force now. I'd kept her number the way you keep a key to a house you no longer live in, not expecting to use it, just unable to throw it away. Reyes was 26 when they assigned her to me, all nerves and ambition, sure she'd be chasing gunmen. I remember her face the first time I made her listen to a scam tape for the 40th time. Her frustration. Her, "Sir, we've heard this. What are we even listening for?" And I remember telling her the thing my own mentor told me, that this work isn't about hearing what's loud. It's about hearing what's quiet, the pause before a lie, the word a man reaches for when he's improvising, the single syllable where the practice script slips, and the real person shows through. She thought I was a boring old man wasting her talent. Then one day, on a tape we'd both heard 50 times, she sat up straight and said, "There," he said, "the account, not his account. He doesn't own it. Someone above him does." And I watched her become, in that instant, the investigator she is now. I never told her how proud that moment made me. Men of my generation didn't. I wish I had. So when I called her at 1 in the morning, I wasn't calling a contact. I was calling the best thing I ever made in that career, the one piece of it that outlasted me. I called her, and I said, "Reyes, it's Frank Delano. I've got a live grandparent scam crew sending a mule to my door at 10 a.m. Cash pickup. I've been stringing the handler for an hour. Do you want them?" There was a silence on the line, and then my old trainee, now a woman who ran task forces, said the thing that told me the next 3 weeks were going to be very bad for 11 people. She said, "Frank, we've been chasing this exact crew across 3 states for 8 months. The cash pickup cell is the only part of them that ever touches the ground. Do not do anything. I'm getting dressed." And then, softer, in a voice that wasn't the task force commander anymore but the 26-year-old from the gray room, "It's really good to hear your voice, sir. I thought, after Ruth, I didn't want to bother you. I'm glad you called. I didn't have words for that. I just said, 'Come catch some criminals, Reyes.'" And I heard her laugh and hang up, and I sat in the dark feeling, for the first time in 11 months, like part of something again. 8 months, 3 states. And the one thread they could never grab, the courier, the ground-level mule, was going to walk up my porch steps in 9 hours because a hunter at midnight had picked the wrong old man off a list. Do you see now why I smiled in the dark? But I promised you the floor would keep moving, and it did. Because the next morning almost everything went wrong, and I have to tell you the truth about that, because the version where it all goes smoothly is a lie. and lies don't help the people this could happen to. Reyes and her people set up before dawn. The plan was simple in shape and delicate in execution. I would play the frightened old man one more time on my own porch in daylight, with a package that looked like $9,400 in cash. The courier would take it. And the moment the handoff completed, the moment a real human being accepted what he believed was stolen money from a victim, he'd be taken, and everything on his phone, every number, every text to the handler, every address in the chain, would become the thread that unspooled the whole operation. They came in through the back before the sky was light. 6 of them, quiet as I remembered good teams being quiet. Reyes hugged me in my own kitchen. She wasn't 26 anymore. There was gray at her temples now, and it did something to my chest to see it. And then she became all business, and I watched her run a briefing in my living room with the calm authority of someone who'd learned it, once, from me. They wired the porch. They positioned themselves in the 2 rooms with sightlines to the door. They gave me an earpiece, then thought better of it. Too visible, a professional might spot it, and settled on a small microphone instead, so they could hear everything I heard. And Reyes knelt in front of my chair, the way you kneel in front of a child, and looked me hard in the eye and said, "Frank, you spent your life telling us the hardest part of this job is knowing when to stop. If anything feels wrong, anything, you say the word, and we come through that door, and we don't care about the case. A crew is worth nothing. You're worth everything. Do you understand me?" And I did understand her, and I loved her for it. And I also knew I wasn't going to say the word, because I'd waited 11 months in a chair to feel this awake, and a decade to keep the promise I'd made in Mrs. Abernathy's kitchen. But at 9:40, 20 minutes before the pickup, the lawyer called again, and his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. The contempt was gone. What was there instead was the thing I'd feared most: suspicion. Somewhere in the machine, an alarm had tripped. Maybe my grandson's story hadn't matched a detail. Maybe they'd run my name, and something about a retired fraud investigator had surfaced. Maybe they were just careful that morning. But the lawyer's voice was flat and watching now, and he said, "Mr. Delano, before our courier arrives, I need you to confirm some information, and I need you to stay on the line with me the entire time he's there. Do you understand? Do not hang up." My heart, which had been so calm, went cold, because I understood exactly what this was. This was a countermeasure. He wanted me on the phone during the pickup so he could hear, in real time, if anything was wrong, if there was a stranger's voice, a car door, a whisper, the particular silence of a house full of hidden police. If he heard one wrong sound, he'd tell the courier a code word, and the mule would walk away clean, and the thread would break, and 8 months of Reyes's work and my one good night of purpose would collapse. I had to run a live, on a professional con artist, while a task force I couldn't acknowledge crouched in my house, and I had to do it with nothing but my voice and 33 years and the sound of my own old heart in my ears. So I want to tell you exactly what I did, because it's the most important thing in this whole story, and it's the thing I'm least able to take full credit for, because it came from the deepest part of the training, from the gray rooms, from every tape I ever wore out. I didn't fight the suspicion, I fed the fear underneath it. A suspicious predator is looking for a victim who's too calm, too smooth, too rehearsed, the signs of a trap. So I gave him the opposite. I let my terror flood all the way up, real as I could make it, and I turned it on him. "Please," I said, and my voice broke, and I let it. "Please don't take Danny's money and not help him. I've heard about people. I've heard on the news about scams. Oh God, is this real? Is my grandson really? Please, sir, tell me this is real. I'm so frightened. I don't know what to do." I accused him of being the scam. I wept. I became so completely the pathetic, terrified, gullible old man that his suspicion had nowhere to stand, because suspicion is looking for a man who's in control, and I gave him a man falling apart. I made my supposed panic so loud and so real that it drowned out every quiet sound in the house, and I heard him decide, for the second time, that I was harmless. I heard the suspicion drain back out of his voice, heard the contempt come home. "It's real, Mr. Delano. Calm down. The courier is pulling up now. Give him the package, stay on the line, and this will all be over." The courier was pulling up now. I walked to my door on legs I let shake for the microphone in the lawyer's ear, and I opened it, and there on my porch in the morning light was a young man, not a monster. That's the part that stays with me. A kid, maybe 23, in a cheap collared shirt, holding a clipboard to look official, with eyes that were trying very hard to look bored, and were instead just scared. A low-level mule, probably in debt, probably lied to about what this really was, probably one rung up from being a victim himself. I felt something I did not expect to feel, standing there. I felt sorry for him. For one strange second, looking at that frightened kid, I was back in Mrs. Abernathy's kitchen, and I understood that this crime eats people at both ends. It eats the lonely old widow who can't hang up, and it eats the broke young man who takes a job he half knows is wrong, because the rent is due and the recruiter was so friendly, and it's just picking up a package. What's the harm? The machine grinds them both. The men I really wanted, the ones who built the machine, were 1,000 miles away and would never come to anyone's porch. But you catch a machine the way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time, starting with the part that's standing in front of you. But I thought of Ruth, and I thought of every widow and widower whose grave these people had smelled, whose loneliness they'd turned into a business, and I held out the package with a trembling hand, and I played the last note of the con perfectly. "Is this enough?" I whispered, for the man on the phone. "Is this enough to bring my Danny home?" The kid took the package, he took it. The handoff completed, and then the quiet house was not quiet anymore. I won't pretend I did the next part. I didn't. Younger, faster people than me came through the doors, and it was over in seconds, and the kid on my porch went down more frightened than dangerous, and the phone in my hand, with the lawyer still on the line, still listening, still not understanding, became, in that instant, the single most valuable piece of evidence in an 8-month investigation. Because the handler hadn't hung up. He was still there, in my ear, saying, "Mr. Delano? Mr. Delano, what's happening?" While his own voice poured into a federal recording device, while the courier's phone, now in Reyes's gloved hands, lit up with the entire architecture of the operation, the handler's number, the numbers above him, the addresses, the accounts, the whole rotten tree. I lifted the phone to my mouth, and for the first and only time, I let the old man fall away, and I let him hear who he'd actually called at midnight. I said, quietly, in my real voice, the voice from the gray rooms, "There is no Danny. There never was. My name is Frank Delano. I spent 33 years investigating men like you. You called a retired fraud agent at midnight and read him your whole script, and I recorded every word, and your courier is in handcuffs on my porch, and his phone is telling us everything. You picked me off a list because you thought a lonely old man was the easiest thing in the world. I need you to understand, before you run, and you can't run, that the easiest thing in the world was the trap. Good night." And I hung up. Now, I promised you this wasn't a movie, and it isn't. So let me be honest about what came after, because the honest part is the part that matters. It was not instant. It took 3 weeks, not 3 seconds. The courier's phone gave up the handler. The handler, facing what he was facing, gave up the tier above him, and Reyes's team, patient the way I taught her to be patient, pulled the thread through 3 states until, 23 days after a phone rang in my dark bedroom, 11 people were arrested, and a call center that had stolen from hundreds of elderly people, hundreds, Ruth, hundreds of people just as lonely as I'd become, went silent for good. I was there for some of those 3 weeks, in a way I hadn't expected. Reyes asked me to consult, not officially, I'm retired, but to sit in a room with her young agents and listened to the tapes they were pulling off the seized phones. Because, she told them, this man can hear things you can't. And I sat in a gray room again, a real one, for the first time in 5 years, with coffee that was just as bad as I remembered, and I listened, and I could still do it. That was the quiet gift inside the whole thing. I'd been so sure that part of me was gone, retired, buried, that the lights were off. And here I was, hearing the slip in a handler's voice, the reached-for word, the pause before the lie, teaching a kid, a third my age, the same thing I taught Reyes at 26. The house was not empty, I'd forgotten. It took 11 criminals to remind me. One night in that room, a young agent, not much older than the courier, asked me why I'd done it, why an old man alone would string along a scammer for an hour instead of just hanging up safe. And I thought about it, and I told him about Mrs. Abernathy, and the sentence she couldn't stop saying, he called me grandma, and I couldn't hang up. And I told him that some debts you carry your whole life, and some promises you make in a stranger's kitchen, wait a decade for their chance, and that I was just an old man finally getting to keep one. He didn't say anything, but I saw him write something down, and I hope it was that. Most of the money those people lost was never recovered. I want to say that plainly, because the fantasy is that the hero gets it all back, and the truth is that stolen money mostly stays stolen. What we recovered was not dollars. It was the operation itself. It was the hundreds of people who would have been called next month, and the month after, who never got that midnight call, because the machine that would have made it was in pieces. That's the real return, not the money back. The next victim spared. And I have to tell you about the young courier, because he's the part I still turn over at night. He cooperated fully. He was, as I'd guessed, in over his head, recruited with a lie, drowning in a debt of his own. He is facing consequences, and he should, because knowing you're doing wrong and doing it anyway is still a choice. But Reyes tells me the prosecutors are treating him as what he mostly was, a used thing, a lever, someone's mule, and not as the architect. I find I'm glad of that. Justice that can't tell the difference between the hand and the head isn't justice, it's just appetite. I saw enough appetite dressed up as justice in 33 years. I didn't want to add to it. There's a cost to what I did, and I'll name it, because I named the costs in every case I ever worked, and I won't stop now. For 3 weeks I lived inside the fear I'd been performing. I'd trained myself so well to be the frightened, diminished old man that some nights, after it was over, I couldn't quite find the other man again, the one from the gray rooms. I'd made myself small and afraid, so convincingly that it took a while to remember it was a costume. That's the danger nobody warns you about. When you pretend to be the thing the world says you are, you have to work to come back. I came back, but it took Ruth's photograph on the nightstand, and a long talk with my daughter, and a while of remembering, on purpose, who I actually am. My daughter, when she found out, and I did tell her, once it was safe, because the whole crime runs on secrecy, and I wasn't going to keep secrets from the one child I have. My daughter was furious with me first, the way love comes out sideways as anger. You strung along a criminal organization, alone, at 71, in the dark, and you didn't call me? And she was right. And I told her she was right. And I also told her the truth, which was harder. I told her that for 11 months I'd been disappearing, a little more each day, sitting in her mother's chair, letting the mail pile up, becoming exactly the empty house those men thought they'd found. And that when the phone rang at midnight, it was the first time since the funeral that I'd felt the lights come back on inside me. She got quiet at that, and then she said something I'll keep for the rest of my life. She said, "Dad, I've been so scared you were leaving too. I'm just glad something reminded you to stay." We don't talk easily, she and I. We never have. But we talked that night. The scam that was meant to rob me gave me back my own daughter's voice. There's a strange accounting in this world I will never fully understand. Which brings me to the only thing I really want you to carry out of this. They called me because they believed something. And the belief is the whole engine of this crime. And it's a lie that has soaked into the whole world. They believe that an old person is an empty house, that the lights are off, that whatever was inside, the sharpness, the history, the whole competent life, has already moved out, and all that's left is a shell to be stripped for parts. They looked at Widower 71 lives alone on a list, and they saw an empty house, and they broke a window and climbed in. The house was not empty. 33 years were sitting in the dark, fully awake, and had been waiting for someone exactly like them to climb through the window. They thought they'd found a shell. What they found was a man who had spent his whole life learning to sit perfectly still in a dark room and wait for a predator to say one word too many. They gave me 9 hours of words. You are not an empty house. Neither is your mother, your father, the quiet old man next door, whose wife just died. The world will tell them the lights are off. The world is wrong. And the day these people learn to stop believing that lie is the day this entire evil business stops working. Because it only ever worked on the darkness they imagined was there. Ruth's picture is on the nightstand as I tell you this. The house is quiet again. But it's a different quiet now. It's not the quiet of a man who got small. It's the quiet of a man who remembered, at 71, in the dark, with a phone ringing, exactly who he still is. They had no idea who was really on the line. Now they do. And that's where I'll leave you tonight, friend. I told you this because someone hearing it has a parent who's going to get this call, or is going to get it themselves. And I need you to know it's coming. And I need you to know the 2 things that beat it. Don't be too proud to ask for help. And never, ever believe your own house is empty. So let me ask you, and tell me down in the comments because I read them. Have you or someone you love ever gotten one of these calls? What happened? Your story might be the thing that saves the next person scrolling by. If this meant something to you, do an old man a kindness. Like this video and subscribe so these stories can reach the lonely ones, the underestimated ones, the ones who've forgotten how much they still have inside them. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their lights are still on. Take care of your people. Keep your porch light burning. And never let anyone convince you that the house is empty. Until next time.